In this video, we're going to take a look at the Rstudio desktop interface, and then at the very end, we're going to come back and take a really quick look at the Rstudio Cloud interface as well. Rstudio is an open source integrated development environment. Now, this provides our users with a whole suite of tools to help you develop and organize your projects. Now, before I switch over to Rstudio to show you the interface, I do want to point out that this notebook here is more of a quick reference for you. As you can see in each of the sections here, I'm simply identifying the major components and then giving you some description. And this is by no means a complete user's guide for this tool. In fact, in each of the sections, I did try to give you links back to the relevant parts of the Rstudio documentation, so that if you do need more information, you will have that. Also, at the very end, there's some links to some cheat sheets that do contain a ton of useful information. Although those cheat sheets are a bit busy, they can be quite helpful. And then if I scroll back up to the top here, you'll see that I've given you two links back to the Rstudio documentation. One is on using the Rstudio IDE, or the integrated development environment. And the second link here is on debugging with the Rstudio IDE. And this is a really good read and will help you to get started with writing and debugging code using Rstudio. Okay, so let's switch over to Rstudio Desktop. Now, when you first start Rstudio Desktop, you may be presented with 3 or 4 panes, depending on whether or not the script editor is open. If it is not open, then you can create a new R script using the New File button in the toolbar, like so, or you can also do this from the File menu as well. In either case, your screen should look something similar to what we have here. So now on the top left, we have the script editor. This pane will allow us to create, edit, and even debug our R scripts, as well as view data. And we'll see an example of the data viewer in just a moment. In the bottom left, we have the console, terminal, and jobs manager. Now the console is exactly like the R console app or the R interpreter running in terminal, as we've seen in previous videos. The terminal, on the other hand, is the system terminal. And this allows you to use tools external to Rstudio to manipulate files or data without actually having to leave the Rstudio environment. The first time you open the terminal in Rstudio, you may be prompted to supply an administrative password to give it access to specific resources. The Jobs Manager allows you to execute scripts and have them run in the background while you perform other tasks. Just click Start Local Job, and then in the pop-up, supply the R script you want to execute, give it a working directory, and then click Start. The script will be run, and the manager will display active jobs so that you can manage those that are running. In the top right pane, we have the environment, which is your workspace or variable viewer. We also have command history, which allows us to view and manipulate the history of commands that we've already entered. Then there's a connections tab, which allows us to manage connections to online data sources like databases. And then finally in this pane, we have the tutorials tab. If you click the link here, you'll install the Learn R package. Then you can choose from several tutorials covering R and Rstudio. In the bottom right pane, we have the file browser, which allows us to change the current working directory and interact with the file system. There's a plot viewer. This tab will display any figures that are generated during the session. The packages manager shows you the set of available R packages and allows you to load or unload packages as you need. The help tab gives you several links to useful resources by default. And then this tab will actually interact with the help function in the interpreter. And the last tab in this pane is the Viewer tab. The Viewer tab is actually used to display HTML files generated from R Markdown. Now, R Markdown is a version of Markdown that's used to create documents somewhat similar to Jupyter Notebook, but specific only to R. Okay, so we've had a quick tour of the basic interface here, but let's do a quick example to see some of these components in action. So first, let's create a new project. If you recall from the videos and notebooks on the R interpreter, I mentioned that it is a good idea to always start the interpreter from a new folder for every project or analysis. In those videos and notebooks, we even discussed how to set the working directory within the R interpreter. Now in Rstudio Desktop and Rstudio Cloud, they have this concept of a project. And a project is just another way to help you separate your source files, your command history, and even your data. So we're actually going to create a new project, and there are several ways to do this. One is to use the New Project button here in the toolbar. You can also select File, New Project here. And then you can even go all the way over here to the top right corner and click on Project and then select New Project. So I'm going to click on New Project. And a setup wizard appears that allows me to choose between creating a new directory, using an existing directory, or checking out a project from our version control system. So I'm going to click on New Directory, and then it wants to know what type of project we want to create. And in this case, we simply want an empty project. So I'm going to click on New Project here. And then on the next page, for the directory name, I'm actually going to use the name of the dataset that I'll be working with. So I'm going to type iris analysis, and then click Create Project. Now, R has a number of built-in datasets. The dataset we're going to use is actually the iris dataset. This dataset contains measurements on 4 features coming from 3 different species of the iris flower. So now in the console here, I'm going to type data iris. And now that I've loaded this data, I can actually view this data by typing view iris. So this opened a spreadsheet-like interface to display the raw data. And it also allows us to interact with that data. So I could actually sort the data by column by simply clicking on each column. I can even filter the data. So if I click the filter button, I can say, click here and then choose maybe just the values around the peak. Say I want only those values. I can clear the filter. Now, in addition to viewing the raw data, we can actually plot this data. We can create figures from the raw data. So if I wanted to just plot the entire data set, I would go back to the console here and type plot iris. And in the lower right-hand corner in the plots pane, we see a plot comparing each of the features pairwise from the data set. Now, this is a little small, so I can actually click the zoom button here, and this will pop out into a larger window where we can see things a bit more clearly. Now, if I close this and then say maybe we want a box plot instead, I can go back to my console. I can type box plot, iris, hit enter. I, of course, get the box plots in the plot pane here. But you see, we have these arrows left and right. This allows us to cycle through the plots that we've created. And after I've created a plot, let's say maybe I've added a legend and I dressed it up a bit, I can then actually export the plot using the export dropdown here, where I can save it as an image, a PDF, or simply copy it to the clipboard. All right, so you may have noticed that when I typed data iris, that the environment pane here also updated. If I hover over iris, you'll see a tooltip pop up that tells me the type of the data and how much memory this data requires. The right side here gives me a brief summary of the data. It says we have 5 variables. This would be our 4 features and the species, also known as the columns of the data. And we have 150 observations. This is actually going to be the rows in our data set. You'll see similar information here at the bottom of the data viewer. Now, if I click the little arrow next to iris here, you'll see I get a brief summary of each of the 5 columns in the data as well. So the variable viewer in the environment is quite nice. And it updates, like I said, as we enter values in the console. You'll see here that A was also added. In fact, the environment tab is not the only one to automatically update. If we open the history tab again, we see that all the commands we entered in the console are present and are in the order that we entered them in the console. And actually, the history tab does a bit more than just list out the commands we entered. If we double click, say, the plot function here, it will send the command to the console so that we can execute it if we choose to. Alternatively, we can use the To Console button here to do the same thing. Okay, so I said that the top left pane can also be used for script editing. So let's create an R script by going to the New File button and then choosing R script. And then to get us started, I'm just going to paste the commands that we already entered in the console here. And we're going to clean up this plot command here that was in the console. We'll just remove that. Now, in order to run scripts in RStudio, you actually need to save the file first. So we're going to click the Save button, and then we're going to give the file a name. So I'm going to call it Sample, and then just hit Enter to save the file. If we now go over to the Files tab, we see that sample.r is in our directory with our project file. And back over in the script pane, if we hit the Run button, you see that it actually didn't run our script. Instead, this button runs the currently selected line. And if you notice, we had our cursor on the line that assigns the value 42 to A. And when RStudio ran this line, it actually copied it into the console and then executed that line for us. So if we wanted to run the entire script, we would actually need to use the Source button. If we click the down arrow here next to the Source button, we get a few options. The first option is simply sources the file, and this means it's going to run every line in the file. The second option here is going to do the same thing, but it will additionally echo each line or print each line in the console as it runs it. So we're going to choose this option, and we see here that all the commands in our script are being echoed to the console and evaluated. And we even see here that the iris dataset is opened again in the data viewer. And over in the history, we see that instead of listing out every command that was run again, the history actually includes a source command with our script being passed as the argument. Now, if we cycle through the plots, we see that both of our plots were repeated again. And this is because when we sourced our file, we had both the plot and boxplot function calls. Now, one last set of buttons I'm going to show you before we move on to Rstudio Cloud are the remove and clear buttons. The red circle with the white X here will remove or delete the current plot. So if we decide that we no longer want a specific plot, we can click this to remove it, like so. Likewise, with the clear button, which looks like a small broom here, if we wanted to remove all the plots, we can simply click this button and they would all be deleted or removed. Now, we can do the same thing in the history pane as well. So in this case, we have a duplicate assignment to A, and maybe we'd like to clean this up a bit. So I can select the duplicate command and then click the remove button. And of course, we can clear the entire history using the clear button, like so, and now we see that our history is empty. The environment tab also gives us the same capability with dealing with our loaded datasets and variables. So if I click the clear button here, all of our variables have been removed now as well. Now, we've just cleared our environment, the history, and all of our plots. But with our sample script, it contained all the commands that created all of that data. So if we source the file again, we see that everything comes back just as it was. And this is a really nice feature of scripting, and it's worth your time to carefully construct and document your scripts, since we all forget exactly what steps we took when we were working on projects from months ago. And having a good set of well-documented scripts can be extremely helpful if you ever need to reproduce those results, or even if you just want to remind yourself of what you've already done. In any case, I do want to remind you that the RStudio support page has all of this information, including tutorials and even a detailed page showing you how to debug your code, which is something we did not cover here. So at the very least, that's something you're going to want to check out. Now, we're going to quickly switch over to RStudio Cloud. I assume that you've already created an account and are able to log into Rstudio Cloud. If not, please do check out our previous video describing exactly how to do this. Once you have logged in, you should see a page similar to this one displaying your list of projects. Now in this account, and likely with yours since this is probably your first time logging in, there's not going to be any projects yet to be displayed. Also, depending on the width of your browser, you may or may not have the left side menu visible. So to open this menu, just click the menu button in the top left corner, and this is going to give you access to your workspace, projects, and then some other helpful links as well. Now, since we don't have a project, we're going to go ahead and create one. And in Rstudio Cloud, a project is basically the same concept as it was in Rstudio Desktop. And to create this project, I'm just going to click the New Project button in the right-hand corner here. This will create a project in your cloud account storage space, and then it's going to present you with a screen that looks just like Rstudio Desktop if it were locally installed. One difference is the bar at the very top of the window, however. And if you wish to give your project a name, you can see it tells us here that just click on the Untitled project in order to enter whatever name you want. As for the rest of the interface, it is basically the same, with one exception here in the file browser. There's a new button, Upload, that allows you to upload your files from your local machine to your cloud account for use in Rstudio Cloud. So, as I said, we're just going to give you a quick look at this, and we're not going to go into details here since it is basically the same as using Rstudio Desktop. And so hopefully this video has given you an idea of some of the capabilities of not only Rstudio Desktop, but also Rstudio Cloud. And I encourage you to create a project and just start exploring.